May 15, 1947. A concrete detention facility in southern Bavaria, 30 kilometers west of Nuremberg. The morning light cuts through a single barred window and falls across a wooden table. On that table sits a medical file. The file bears no classification stamp, no red urgency marker, no indication that its contents would shatter the certainty of 14 German officers locked in this compound. Obersturmbannführer Klaus Meitner, a logistics administrator who processed paperwork for the Wehrmacht Medical Corps throughout the war, sat rigid in his chair. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on the wall. He had been told he would see evidence that day. He had been told the evidence was photographs. He had seen photographs before. Photographs, he believed, could be interpreted many ways. Photographs lied. The camp commandant, Colonel James Hartford, a medical doctor from Connecticut who had served with the United States Army Medical Corps since 1943, pushed the file across the table. His hands did not shake. His voice did not rise. He simply said the words that every German officer in that room that week would come to dread hearing. Colonel Hartford spoke. These are the medical records of 23 children, ages 6 to 14, all Polish, all treated at a United States Army field hospital in Dachau, Germany, beginning April 28, 1945, the day we liberated the camp. The children are alive. 7 of them will recover fully. The others will carry what was done to them for the remainder of their lives. We are going to show you photographs of their recovery. We are going to tell you what was done to them. We are going to explain how we know. And then you are going to tell us everything you know. Meitner did not move. The other 13 officers in the room remained silent. They had been denied food for 36 hours. They had been kept awake under rotating interrogation. They had been shown evidence of their own signatures on logistics forms, procurement records, wire transfers that authorized the purchase of ice, salt solutions, and syringes in quantities that far exceeded any legitimate medical need. The officers had been forced to listen to testimony from 3 survivors who had been present during the experiments. They had heard descriptions of screaming. They had heard the words repeated: tables, metal tables, straps, blood on the floor, numbness that never went away. And yet the certainty held. The compartmentalization held. The denial held. Klaus Meitner had processed 743 procurement requests during the war. He had never once asked what the materials were for. To ask would have required him to know. Not knowing was safer. Not knowing was a professional courtesy extended throughout the entire apparatus. The officer above you did not want to know. The officer below you did not need to know. The officer beside you understood that to know was to become complicit in a way that mere signature and duty could not reach. Meitner had signed his name to requests for morphine, gauze, and surgical tape. He had also signed requests for concentrated salt solutions and electrical heating elements. He had filed them in separate folders. He had never allowed himself to calculate what the combination of those items might mean. He had attended exactly 1 meeting in November of 1943, where a civilian physician from Berlin had presented preliminary findings to the commanding officers of the medical corps. The physician had spoken of hypothermia experiments, of temperature thresholds, of data that would benefit the Reich. The presentation had lasted 9 minutes. Meitner had been seated in the back row. He had not taken notes. He had left the meeting and filed a memo that said only, "Meeting conducted. Attendees briefed on protocol adjustments. Follow-up correspondence archived." That memo had become evidence. Now, in this concrete room in Bavaria, the certainty was beginning to crack. Colonel Hartford opened the medical file again. He withdrew a single photograph. He placed it face up on the table. The photograph showed a child's hand. The hand was small. The fingers were long and slender. The flesh was marked with what appeared to be frost-burned tissue, a pattern of dark red fading to pale white. The hand was being held gently by another hand. The other hand belonged to a United States Army nurse. Her name was printed on the reverse of the photograph. Sarah Chen, from Seattle, Washington. The date of the photograph was stamped in the corner, May 3, 1947. The photograph was a record of a moment. In that moment, a child from Warsaw, a child whose name the Germans had never bothered to learn, was being examined by an American physician to determine if the nerves in her hand could still feel sensation. Colonel Hartford did not need to explain the photograph. The officers in that room understood photography. They understood before and after images. They understood medical documentation. They understood that the hand in the photograph was evidence of an event, and they understood that the event had been repeated 23 times on 23 children. Klaus Meitner looked away. The interrogation lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, Meitner had confirmed 7 dates. He had confirmed the names of 2 commanding physicians. He had confirmed that he had in fact seen preliminary results typed on official SS letterhead. Results that indicated that 94 children had been subjected to what the document called exposure protocols. 11 of the 94 had died. The others had survived with varying degrees of tissue damage, neurological impairment, and psychological trauma. He had filed the report. He had initialed it. He had sent it up the chain. And then, he had not thought about it again. Or rather, he had trained himself not to think about it. The mind is capable of extraordinary compartmentalization. The human capacity for not knowing is limitless. When the interrogation ended, Meitner was led back to his cell. That night he did not sleep. He sat on the edge of his bunk and stared at his hands. His hands had signed the procurement orders. His hands had filed the reports. His hands had never touched a child. His hands had never caused pain directly. And yet, somewhere in the logic of the bureaucracy, in the mathematics of supply and demand, in the chain of signatures and countersignatures, his hands had been essential to the machinery. The uncertainty was beginning to grow. May 16th, 1947. The detention facility. The gymnasium had been converted into a makeshift medical observation room. 14 German officers had been ordered to attend. The order came from Colonel Hartford personally. The order had been issued by the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg. The officers would observe. They would watch. They would see what American medicine could do for the children they had helped to destroy. The gymnasium doors opened. Nurse Sarah Chen wheeled in a child on a metal gurney. The child was a girl. Her name was Anna Kovacs. She was 8 years old. Her hair had been shorn short during her internment at Dachau. It had begun to grow back. It was dark and fine. She was wearing a hospital gown. She was conscious. She was awake. Her eyes moved across the room. Her eyes found the German officers. She stared at them. No one had prepared the officers for this. No one had told them that the children would be aware of them. No one had told them that the children would look at them. The certainty of denial requires distance. It requires abstraction. It requires the victims to remain abstract, numerical, distant in time and space. The moment a face appears, the moment a pair of eyes makes contact, the abstraction collapses. Colonel Hartford stepped forward. He was holding a clipboard. He was holding medical notes. He began to speak. This is Anna Kovacs. She was subjected to hypothermia experiments on December 4th, 1944. On that date, she was immersed in tanks of ice water for a period of approximately 4 hours. The immersion was repeated on 4 additional dates over a 10-day period. The documented purpose was to gather data on the rate of core body temperature decline in pediatric subjects. The documented goals included establishing protocols for reviving subjects after exposure. The documented hypothesis was that the data gathered would assist the German war effort by providing essential information on survival rates for pilots shot down over northern territories. Hartford paused. He looked directly at Klaus Meitner. Hartford continued. The hypothesis was never tested. The revival protocols never improved. The German war effort did not benefit. 43 children participated in this specific protocol. 11 of them died. Anna Kovacs did not die, but Anna Kovacs will experience chronic pain in her extremities for the remainder of her life. Anna will have reduced sensitivity in her fingers and toes. Anna will experience episodes of intense cold that trigger panic and hyperventilation. Anna will require ongoing psychological treatment to manage trauma. Anna's hands will never feel quite right again. Anna was wheeled closer to the officers. She was positioned so that the officers could see her hands. Nurse Chen gently lifted each of Anna's hands, one at a time. The hands showed the same frost-burned tissue that had been visible in the photograph. The tissue was pale. The tissue was textured. The tissue was permanent. Colonel Hartford spoke again. Nurse Chen is going to touch Anna's hand with a sterile needle. The needle will be pressed firmly into different areas of tissue. Anna is going to tell us whether she can feel the needle. Anna is going to tell us how much it hurts. Anna is going to provide us with a map of her own body, a map that shows us exactly what your physicians accomplished. The needle approached. Anna's eyes were closed. Her breathing was controlled. She had done this before. She had been rehearsed. She understood what was happening. She understood why the German officers were in the room. The needle touched her palm. Anna said nothing. The needle moved. Anna said nothing. The needle reached her thumb. Anna said in Polish, translated by an interpreter standing beside her, "I feel cold. Everything is cold." The needle moved again. Anna said, "Nothing. I feel nothing." And again. Anna said, "Pain. It hurts there." The demonstration lasted 15 minutes. By the end of it, a complete map of sensation had been drawn on Anna Kovach's hands and forearms. The map showed regions of complete numbness. The map showed regions of hypersensitivity. The map showed a landscape of damage that corresponded precisely to the medical notes that Colonel Hartford had filed. The notes that had been typed up by military stenographers. The notes that had been signed and archived and filed in folders marked confidential. When the demonstration ended, Nurse Chen wheeled Anna away. The girl did not look at the German officers again. Her hands, resting on the edge of the gurney, were visible until the doors to the gymnasium closed. Klaus Meitner did not move. Neither did any of the other officers. They had been watching a child. They had been watching a child's body become evidence. They had been watching a child become a document. Later that afternoon, Colonel Hartford presented a briefing. The officers were seated in rows. Photographs were projected onto a screen. The photographs showed the interior of the Dachau medical facility. The photographs showed the ice tanks. The photographs showed syringes lined up on metal trays. The photographs showed charts with temperature readings recorded in precise handwriting. The photographs showed medical protocols signed and approved by 3 separate commanding physicians. The photographs showed everything. Hartford presented the data. Between September 1943 and April 1945, 94 children were subjected to controlled hypothermia protocols at Dachau. The ages ranged from 5 to 16. 87 were Polish. 7 were Roma. All were selected because they were classified as outside the protection of international law. All were imprisoned. All were unable to consent. All were subjected to repeated immersion in ice water for periods ranging from 30 minutes to 4 hours. Core temperatures were recorded. Survival rates were documented. Revival methods were tested. 71 of the 94 survived the initial protocols. 63 survived to liberation. 54 survived to this day, May 16, 1947. The others died of complications related to tissue damage, infection, or psychological breakdown. The death rate was 11% during the experiments. The complication rate was 34%. The permanent disability rate was 94%. The rate at which the German military used the data produced by these experiments was 0%. The experiments were completed. The data was filed. The war was lost. The data was never analyzed by anyone other than the physicians who conducted the experiments. The data was useless. The data was murder disguised as research. An officer in the third row stood up. His name was Hauptsturmführer Friedrich Wolters. He was a medical supply officer. His voice was shaking. Wolters said, "I want to state clearly that I did not know. I processed supply requests. I did not know the purpose. I did not ask. I followed procedure. Procedure did not require me to know the purpose." Colonel Hartford did not respond. The silence in the room became heavy. The silence became the answer. Another officer stood, then another. All of them said variations of the same thing. I did not know. I did not ask. I followed orders. I followed procedure. I was not told. I was kept at a distance. I was compartmentalized. Colonel Hartford waited for all of them to finish. Then he spoke. "You knew enough to process the supply requests. You knew enough to authorize the expenditures. You knew enough to file the reports. You knew enough to sign your name. That was enough. Your government did not give you permission to not know. Your government had already decided that you would know. Your government decided that you would be part of this apparatus. Your ignorance was not innocence. Your ignorance was architecture. The officers sat down. No one else spoke. Colonel Hartford opened a filing cabinet. He withdrew a file folder marked with a red stripe. The red stripe indicated confidential German military classification. The folder was thick. Inside were copies of SS memoranda, procurement records, medical reports, temperature charts, and death certificates. Hartford displayed them one by one. First memorandum, September 12, 1943. From Obersturmbannführer Klaus Richter, commanding physician of the Dachau Medical Corps, to SS Obersturmbannführer Dr. Zygmunt Rascher. The protocol has been approved. Child subjects may begin immersion. Initial cohort will comprise 12 subjects. Ages 6 to 10. Duration of immersion will range from 30 to 60 minutes. We anticipate gathering essential data on pediatric hypothermia response within 4 weeks. Second memorandum. October 3, 1943. From Dr. Rascher to SS Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler, initial results exceed expectations. 7 of 12 subjects show recovery potential following submersion protocols. Core temperatures as low as 24 degrees Celsius have been achieved with restoration to normal range within 45 minutes. Recommend expansion of protocol to include additional subjects and extended duration of submersion. Third document. A requisition form dated October 15, 1943, requesting 200 kilograms of ice, 50 liters of salt solution, and 30 kilograms of morphine. Signed by Dr. Rascher. Approved and processed by Klaus Meitner. Meitner had initialed the form in the corner. His initials were KM. They were neat. They were precise. They were followed by a date and a time. 14:30 hours. Hartford looked directly at Klaus Meitner. Hartford said, "At 14:30 hours on October 15, 1943, you authorized the purchase of materials that would be used to immerse children in ice water. You did not know this at the time, you claim. And yet, the materials themselves should have suggested the purpose. Ice, salt solution, morphine. These 3 items in combination suggest a protocol involving pain and cold. You are an intelligent man, Meitner. You are educated, you have a medical background, you trained as a pharmacist before the war. You would have recognized what these materials meant." Meitner did not respond. He could not respond. The certainty of compartmentalization had been dismantled by the precision of documentation. The Nazis had kept meticulous records. The Nazis had filed everything. The Nazis had created a paper trail so complete, so detailed, so thoroughly documented, that denial was impossible. The mathematics of death had been translated into the language of bureaucracy. And bureaucracy does not lie. Bureaucracy simply records. Hartford presented a final document. A summary report filed on March 15, 1945, just weeks before liberation. The report summarized the complete hypothermia protocol. It listed all 94 subjects by name, age, and point of origin. It provided temperature data. It provided survival data. It provided an assessment of the medical relevance of the findings. The assessment was written by Dr. Rascher himself. Rascher had written, "The data gathered from pediatric subjects provides valuable information regarding the limits of human thermoregulation. However, the applicability to military training and pilot selection remains uncertain. The protocol should be continued to gather additional comparative data from adult subjects. The war does not provide sufficient opportunity to complete comprehensive analysis. It is the recommendation of this office that these protocols be continued after the war, with expanded subject populations and expanded institutional support." Dr. Rascher had signed the document. Dr. Rascher had dated it. Dr. Rascher had sent it up the chain, and the chain had done nothing. The war had ended. The protocols had stopped, but not because of ethics, not because anyone had objected. The protocols had stopped because the war was lost. The evidence was complete. The certainty could no longer hold. May 17, 1947. Dawn breaks over the detention facility. Klaus Meitner has not slept. He has sat on his bunk in the darkness, his hands folded on his knees, and he has thought about numbers. Numbers are easier than faces. Numbers are easier than hands. Numbers are easier than the memory of a child's eyes looking directly at him, asking a question without words. "Do you know what you did?" At 0630 hours, the officers are marched to a new location. It is a wing of the facility that has been converted into a medical observation ward. The officers are not told what they will see. They are simply arranged in a viewing gallery. Behind a pane of glass, separated by distance and transparency, is a pediatric surgical room. The room is equipped with modern American surgical equipment. Lamps hang from the ceiling. Instruments are arranged on metal trays. Blood pressure cuffs are mounted on walls. Oxygen lines are coiled and ready. A child is brought in on a gurney. It is a different child from yesterday. This one is a boy. He appears to be about 10 years old. He is conscious, he is frightened. Nurse Sarah Chen is with him. She is speaking to him in Polish. She is explaining what is about to happen. She is saying words like surgery and repair and healing. She is saying words designed to reduce fear in a child who has no reason to trust any adult. Colonel Hartford stands outside the glass partition. He is holding a medical chart. He begins to narrate for the officers. This is Jakob Nowak, age 9. He was subjected to hypothermia protocols at Dachau on 7 separate occasions between October 1944 and February 1945. The protocols resulted in severe frostbite to both feet. The damage extended into muscle tissue and nerve tissue. Jakob has been at this facility for 3 weeks. He has received antibiotic treatment, pain management, and preliminary surgical assessment. Today he will undergo a procedure called selective tissue debridement. The surgical team will remove dead tissue from both feet. The procedure will take approximately 90 minutes. Jakob will be anesthetized. Jakob will feel no pain. When Jakob wakes up, he will be one step closer to recovery. A surgeon enters the room. He is wearing a surgical mask. His hands are gloved. He is carrying an instrument case. Behind him, a surgical nurse arranges instruments on a table. Each instrument is placed with precision. Each instrument is labeled. Each instrument is placed exactly where the surgeon's hand will reach for it. The surgeon approaches Jakob. He speaks to the boy in careful, measured tones. The surgeon explains the procedure. The surgeon describes what anesthesia will feel like. The surgeon describes what recovery will look like. The surgeon describes, with gentleness and clarity, exactly what is going to happen to Jakob's body. Then the surgeon holds out his hand. Jakob takes it. And Klaus Meitner, watching through a pane of glass, feels something break inside him. It is not sentimentality. It is not sudden morality. It is something more precise and more terrible. It is recognition. It is the moment at which abstraction becomes specificity. It is the moment at which a number becomes a child. It is the moment at which procedure becomes consequence. The surgeon and the child clasp hands for 4 seconds. Then the anesthesiologist approaches with a mask. The mask is placed gently over Jakob's nose and mouth. The child breathes. The child's eyes close. The child falls into unconsciousness, knowing that when he wakes, someone will have worked to repair what others had destroyed. Klaus Meitner's hands begin to shake. The surgery begins. The surgeon uses a scalpel to carefully separate dead tissue from living tissue. The separation is precise. The separation requires knowledge. The separation requires a commitment to repair that is the absolute inverse of the commitment to damage. The surgeon works for 42 minutes on the left foot. The tissue is removed. The wound is cleaned. The wound is prepared for healing. Klaus Meitner realizes with a certainty that mirrors the certainty of his denial that he has never witnessed repair before. He has witnessed damage. He has processed the paper that enabled damage. He has signed his name to documents that authorized damage. But he has never stood still and watched someone work to undo damage. He has never watched a human hand move with deliberation and care to restore what had been destroyed. The mathematics of damage is simple. It is subtraction. It is removal. It is the draining of function, of sensation, of life. The mathematics of repair is more complex. It requires knowledge of what was lost. It requires imagination of what can be recovered. It requires a commitment to the possibility of restoration. When the surgery ends, the wound is bandaged. The foot is elevated. The monitor beside the surgical table shows Jakob's vital signs. Heart rate stable. Blood pressure normal. Oxygen saturation adequate. The child is breathing. The child is alive. The child is being carried back to recovery by a team of people whose only purpose is to restore what others had taken. The officers are led away from the observation window. Later that day, the officers are assembled in an interrogation room. This time, they are not separated. They are arranged around a table. Colonel Hartford is present. Beside him is Captain David Rothstein, a psychiatrist who has been brought in to observe the officers' reactions. Rothstein is taking notes. Rothstein is studying faces. Rothstein is watching the moment when denial transforms into something else. Hartford places two medical charts on the table. The charts are identical in format. They are both filled with precise medical notation, careful handwriting, and official stamps. One chart is from the Nazi medical records. One chart is from the American medical records. Hartford speaks. I want you to understand the difference between two types of documentation. Both are medical records. Both are kept by trained professionals. Both reflect the state of a human body at a particular moment in time. What differs is not the precision of the documentation. What differs is the intention behind the documentation. Hartford opens the Nazi record first. The record is dated December 4, 1944. It documents Jakob Nowak's immersion in ice water. It records core body temperature readings at regular intervals. It records heart rate. It records respiratory rate. It records the duration of immersion. It records the child's physical condition at the beginning of the procedure and at the end. The notation is clinical. The notation is objective. The notation demonstrates that the person who wrote it was trained in medicine and understood the significance of the measurements. At the bottom of the page, there is a single handwritten note. The note reads, "Subject recovered normal temperature range within 32 minutes. No revival intervention required. Data confirms hypothesis regarding pediatric thermoregulation response. Recommend continuation of protocol with extended submersion duration in subsequent trials." Hartford closes the Nazi record. He opens the American record. The American record is dated May 17, 1947. It documents Jakob Nowak's preoperative evaluation. It records measurements of foot tissue. It records temperature readings. It records sensation testing. It records the degree of tissue damage quantified by centimeter and by severity classification. The notation is clinical. The notation is objective. The notation demonstrates that the person who wrote it was trained in medicine and understands the significance of the measurements. At the bottom of the American record, there is a handwritten note. The note reads, "Tissue viability assessment indicates 67% of foot tissue remains salvageable. Recommendation for selective debridement followed by cellular regeneration support. Prognosis for functional recovery of left foot rated as good. Prognosis for functional recovery of right foot rated as fair. Recommend follow-up surgical intervention in 6 to 8 weeks. Child psychologically stable. Demonstrates resilience and trust in medical team." Hartford places both records side by side. Hartford says, "These are the same child. These records were separated by 2 years and 4 months. These records were separated by the difference between medicine designed to gather data and medicine designed to heal. Look at the intentions embedded in the language. The first record asks, how long can we push this? The second record asks, how can we help this child recover? Those are not the same questions. Those questions cannot be asked by the same kind of mind operating under the same kind of instruction." Klaus Meitner stares at the two records. He is seeing something. He is understanding something. He is making a connection that his mind has been trained not to make for 4 years. Meitner speaks, his voice very quiet. The second record, the prognosis. Fair. Good. That language. That is not the language they used. The language they used was different. Hartford nods. Hartford says, "Describe the language you remember." Meitner closes his eyes. He is accessing memories that he has compartmentalized. He is retrieving language that he has trained himself not to hear. He is translating the neutral clinical notation into the intention that it concealed. Meitner says, "The language was about limits, about thresholds, about how much damage could be sustained before the subject became useless for data. It was the language of optimization, of pushing the protocol to the point of failure, and then backing off slightly to gather clean data. It was mathematical. It was cold." Another officer, Hauptsturmführer Wilhelm Berger, a records administrator, speaks up. His voice is shaking. Berger says, "I organized those files. I kept the filing system. I arranged the records in order of date. I created the indices. I made it so that anyone looking for data on a particular child could locate it quickly. I made the system efficient. I never looked at the content. I only organized the structure." Hartford says, "The structure you created made it easier to locate data on the next child to be subjected to the protocol. The structure you created accelerated the process. The structure you created was part of the machinery." Berger starts to cry. His hands are on the table. His shoulders are shaking. He is crying like a man who has just realized something that his compartmentalization had protected him from understanding. He is crying like a man who understands that his efficiency, his precision, his organizational skill had been weaponized. The other officers do not speak. They are watching Berger cry. They are watching what happens when the architecture of denial collapses under the weight of its own precision. Colonel Hartford does not comfort Berger. Hartford simply waits. Hartford allows the silence to extend. Hartford allows each officer in that room to feel the weight of what they have just understood. Later that evening, Colonel Hartford delivers a presentation to the entire group of detained officers. This is not an interrogation. This is an education. Hartford is going to explain, in precise and relentless detail, exactly how the machinery of medical atrocity functions. He is going to explain how something like the hypothermia experiments becomes possible. He is going to explain the role of every person in the chain. Hartford projects an organizational chart onto the wall. The chart shows the hierarchy of the Nazi medical corps. At the top is the Reichsführer SS, Heinrich Himmler. Below Himmler are multiple layers of administrative authority. The chart branches downward, splitting into different divisions of responsibility. One branch leads to the Medical Research Division. One branch leads to the Medical Administration Division. One branch leads to the Procurement and Supply Division. One branch leads to the Records and Archives Division. Hartford points to each division. Hartford says, "The Medical Research Division conceives of experiments. The Medical Research Division seeks to justify those experiments as scientifically valuable. The Medical Research Division recruits physicians to design protocols. The Medical Research Division produces memoranda arguing that the experiments serve the German war effort. The Medical Research Division generates written justification for actions that are, in fact, unjustifiable." Hartford moves to the next branch. Hartford says, "The Medical Administration Division approves the experiments. The Medical Administration Division allocates resources. The Medical Administration Division authorizes the expenditure of funds for materials and for compensation to physicians. The Medical Administration Division creates the official sanction that makes the experiments possible." Hartford moves to the next branch. Hartford says, "The Procurement and Supply Division fulfills the requirements. The Procurement and Supply Division purchases the ice, the salt, the syringes, the morphine. The Procurement and Supply Division arranges transportation. The Procurement and Supply Division ensures that materials arrive on schedule. The Procurement and Supply Division makes the physical reality of the experiments possible." Hartford moves to the final branch. Hartford says, "The Records and Archives Division documents everything. The Records and Archives Division creates the paper trail. The Records and Archives Division ensures that every decision, every authorization, every instruction exists in duplicate, in triplicate, in permanent form. The Records and Archives Division transforms the invisible into the documented. The Records and Archives Division creates the evidence." Hartford turns back to face the officers. Hartford says, "Every person in every division is essential. Remove any one of these divisions and the experiment becomes more difficult. Remove the Medical Research Division, and there is no scientific justification. Remove the Medical Administration Division, and there is no official authorization. Remove the Procurement and Supply Division, and there are no materials. Remove the Records and Archives Division, and there is no documentation. But remove any one of these divisions and the experiment still happens, because the will to do it is strong enough. The will to do it is rooted in ideology. The will to do it survives the loss of any single component." Hartford pauses. Hartford continues, "What transforms the experiment from difficult to possible is the precise organization of responsibility. What transforms the experiment from possible to inevitable is the distribution of that responsibility across enough people that no single person feels responsible for the whole. Each person feels responsible only for their component. Each person tells themselves that they are not responsible for what others do with their component. Each person signs their name to a form and moves on. Each person is guilty. Each person is also able to believe that they are not guilty. Klaus Meitner realizes in this moment that Hartford is describing him. Hartford is describing the exact configuration of his mind. Hartford is describing the architecture of his denial so precisely that denial becomes impossible. Meitner understands that he has been part of the machinery. He understands that his compartmentalization was not protection. His compartmentalization was participation. His compartmentalization was what made the machinery possible. May 18, 1947. 3 days into the observation and interrogation. Klaus Meitner is in his cell. He has not eaten, he has not slept. He has spent the entire time reviewing, in his mind, every form he has signed, every requisition he has approved, every memo he has filed. He is tracing the mathematics of his participation backward through time. He is trying to identify the moment at which he could have said no. He is trying to identify the moment at which knowledge became unavoidable. He is trying to identify the moment at which he chose not to know. And he realizes that there is no such moment. The choice not to know was made at every moment. The choice not to ask was made at every moment. The choice to compartmentalize was made at every moment. The choice to file the report and move on was made at every moment. He was not coerced into silence. He was coerced into complicity by the system's own efficiency. The system was designed so that complicity required minimal resistance. The system was designed so that objection required more effort than participation. The system was designed so that the path of least resistance led directly into the machinery. That evening, the officers are brought to a room where a survivor is waiting. The survivor is a woman named Katarzyna Lewandowski. Katarzyna is 32 years old. She was imprisoned at Dachau as a political prisoner. She was selected for the hypothermia experiments because she was Polish and therefore deemed expendable. Katarzyna participated in 7 immersion protocols. Katarzyna survived. Katarzyna carries permanent nerve damage in both hands and both feet. Katarzyna walks with a cane. Katarzyna's hands shake when she is cold. Katarzyna's hands shake when she is afraid. Colonel Hartford introduces Katarzyna to the officers. Hartford says, "This is Katarzyna Lewandowski. She is going to tell you about her experience. She is going to do this not for your benefit. She is going to do this as part of the official record. She is going to do this so that it becomes part of the evidence at Nuremberg." Katarzyna speaks. She speaks in Polish. An interpreter translates. Her voice is steady. Her hands are trembling. Katarzyna says, "I was brought to the ice tank on October 18, 1944. The date was recorded in a file. The physicians knew the date. The physicians knew the time. The physicians had decided how long I would remain submerged. I did not know how long. I only knew cold. I only knew the sensation of pain that reaches a level where pain ceases to be pain and becomes something else, becomes the only reality, becomes the only truth." She pauses. She looks directly at the officers. Katarzyna continues. "When I was removed from the water, my hands were blue. My hands were not my hands anymore. My hands belonged to someone else. I watched them revive me. I watched them measure my temperature. I watched them record the data. And I understood, in that moment, that I had become a document. I had become data. I had become evidence of something that the physicians had hypothesized but not yet proven. I was proof. I was evidence. I was useful." She pauses again. Katarzyna says, "The most terrible thing was not the cold. The most terrible thing was not the pain. The most terrible thing was the understanding that this had all been planned. This suffering had been calculated. This suffering had been organized. This suffering served a purpose that had nothing to do with me. I was machinery. I was part of a process. And the people who put me in the water knew exactly what they were doing." Katarzyna looks at Klaus Meitner specifically. Katarzyna says, "You signed the forms that authorized my suffering. Your hand authorized my suffering. You may not have known my name. You may not have looked at my face, but your signature was on the document. Your signature made my suffering possible. Klaus Meitner cannot breathe. He cannot move. He cannot escape the moment at which abstraction becomes specificity. He cannot escape the moment at which numbers become a person. He cannot escape the moment at which procedure becomes consequence. And then he is weeping. It is not controlled weeping, it is not performance. It is the breakdown of every structure he has built to protect himself from understanding what he has done. It is the collapse of the architecture of denial. It is the moment at which he stops being a man who did not know, and becomes a man who understands that his not knowing was itself a choice. His compartmentalization was itself a choice. His participation was itself a choice. The other officers watch. Some of them look away. Some of them remain still. Some of them begin to weep as well. Colonel Hartford does not move. Hartford simply allows this to happen. Hartford knows that this moment is essential. Hartford knows that the recognition, the understanding, the acceptance of complicity is the only foundation upon which justice can be built. May 19th, 1947, Nuremberg, the official courtroom of the International Military Tribunal. The room is filled with attorneys, judges, stenographers, and observers. The trial of the Nazi Medical Corps has moved from the detention facility into the formal legal arena. Klaus Meitner is being questioned. He is no longer weeping, he is now speaking. He is now testifying. He is now entering his words into the permanent record. The prosecutor, Dr. Telford Taylor, stands before Meitner. Taylor has reviewed the entire file. Taylor has interviewed the survivors. Taylor has studied the documents. Taylor understands the machinery. Taylor is going to extract from Meitner a complete accounting of his participation. Taylor speaks. Mr. Meitner, you have stated in previous interrogations that you did not know the purpose of the materials you authorized for purchase. Is that correct? Meitner responds, that is correct. At the time, I did not know. Taylor says, you did not know, or you did not ask. Meitner is silent. The silence extends. The silence becomes the answer. Taylor continues, you were trained as a pharmacist before the war. You understood the medical use of morphine. You understood the use of ice and salt solution in medical contexts. You understood that these three materials in combination suggest a protocol involving pain and cold. Is that correct? Meitner says, I understood this. Yes. Taylor says, and yet you signed the requisition forms without inquiry. You authorized the expenditure without inquiry. You filed the paperwork without inquiry. Is that correct? Meitner says, that is correct. Taylor says, why? Meitner struggles. He is trying to articulate something that he has never articulated before. He is trying to translate the architecture of his denial into language that can be spoken in a courtroom. Meitner says, because the system was organized so that inquiry was discouraged. Because asking questions required a resistance that seemed impossible to sustain. Because not asking was the path of least resistance. Because everyone around me was also not asking. Because the structure of authority was designed to make obedience automatic and objection exceptional. Taylor nods. Taylor says, you were following orders? Meitner says, I was following structure. Structure is more powerful than orders. Orders can be refused. Structure is internalized. Structure becomes the way you think. Structure becomes invisible because it is everywhere. Taylor presents a document. The document is a memo written by Meitner. The memo is dated November 3, 1943. The memo concerns the approval of a supply request. The memo is 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph states the facts of the request. The second paragraph provides authorization. Taylor reads the memo aloud. Upon review of procurement request PZ447, submitted by the Medical Research Division on November 2, 1943, for the purchase of 150 kilograms of pharmaceutical-grade ice, 75 liters of isotonic saline solution, and 40 kilograms of morphine hydrochloride, authorization is hereby granted. Materials are deemed essential for the continuation of approved medical protocols. Expenditure is consistent with quarterly budget allocations. Request is approved and forwarded for immediate fulfillment. Signed, Klaus Meitner, Supply Authorization Officer, November 3, 1943. Taylor closes the document. Taylor says, "In this memo, you state that the materials are deemed essential for the continuation of approved medical protocols. Do you remember writing those words?" Meitner says, "I remember writing that memo." Taylor says, "What protocols were you referring to?" Meitner says, "I did not know. I used the phrase because it was standard language in approval memos. The phrase indicated that I was not questioning the purpose. The phrase indicated that the request had already been vetted by higher authority. The phrase indicated that my role was administrative, not investigative." Taylor says, "The phrase indicated that you understood there were protocols but chose not to investigate what those protocols entailed. Is that correct?" Meitner says, "Yes, that is correct." Taylor presents another document. This one is a report filed by Dr. Rascher in January of 1944. The report describes preliminary findings from the hypothermia protocols. The report mentions, by name, 94 children selected for the study. Beside each name is an age and a point of origin. One name is circled in red pencil. The name is Jakob Nowak. The age is listed as 8 years old. The point of origin is listed as Warsaw. Taylor says, "Do you see this name? Jakob Nowak, age 8. This child was immersed in ice water on 7 separate occasions under protocols that you authorized the materials for. This child suffered permanent nerve damage as a result. This child is currently in an American hospital recovering from surgery. This child will carry the damage you authorized for the remainder of his life. What do you say to that?" Meitner looks at the name. He looks at the age. He looks at the point of origin. He is making the connection between the abstract and the specific. He is making the connection between the form he signed and the face of a child. Meitner says, "I say that I did not know his name. I say that I did not know his age. I say that I did not know what would be done to him. But I also say that I authorized the materials. I say that my authorization made his suffering possible. I say that I bear responsibility for that, even though I claim I did not know. Perhaps especially because I claim I did not know." The courtroom is silent. The judges are taking notes. The stenographer is recording every word. The record is being created. The evidence is being compiled. The machinery that will produce justice is now operating. Over the course of the trial, survivors are brought to testify. Katarzyna Lewandowski testifies about her experience. She describes the cold. She describes the pain. She describes the moment at which she understood that her suffering was being documented, measured, quantified. She describes the moment at which she understood that she had become useful precisely because of her suffering. She describes with precision and emotional clarity what it is like to be transformed from a person into data. Anna Kovacs testifies. She is still small. She is still carrying the memory of what was done to her. She describes the taste of the water. She describes the sound of the physician speaking in clinical tones while her body was being destroyed. She describes the numbness that came after, the numbness that has never fully gone away. She describes waking up in an American hospital and understanding for the first time that healing was possible, that someone could work to undo what others had done. Jakob Nowak testifies. He is 9 years old. His hands are still healing. His feet are still healing. He describes the fear. He describes the confusion. He describes not understanding why the adults were doing this to him. He describes the pain of surgery, which hurt, but was different from the pain of the ice water, which had no purpose except the gathering of data. Each testimony is recorded. Each testimony becomes part of the permanent record. Each testimony becomes evidence that will inform how justice will be constructed.